Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm so glad you guys are here coming to attend the panel, A Seat for Everyone, Inclusivity and RPGs. My name is Adam Davis. I'm one of the executives of Game to Grow. My pronouns are he, him. And before we get started, I want to talk to you a little bit about Game to Grow, which is the reason why I get to be here today. Then we're going to introduce ourselves, the panel, this increasingly growing panel of people up here on this table. We're going to talk a little bit about what inclusion actually means. We're going to have a conversation about that, and then I'm going to have a lot of time for questions. So before we get started, I'm going to take a play from Dr. B's playbook here. Raise your hand if you know what Game to Grow is. You've heard of our organization. Awesome. I'm so glad. I might have told you like a day ago. So Game to Grow is a nonprofit organization. We're based in Seattle, and we are an organization dedicated to the use of games of all kinds for therapeutic, educational, and community growth. Most of the work that we do is around therapy and education, so I'm really excited to be here talking about that third part, about community growth. But I am here because of support from donors. So if you like the work that Game to Grow does, I encourage you to check out gametogrow.org/support. You can do things like buy a cool hoodie, where some of the proceeds go towards Game to Grow. You can change your Amazon smile. Little things go a long way. Also, I would be remiss not to mention that we have a Kickstarter going on right now. Specifically, it's a beginner's box for playing Dungeons & Dragons style game with kids on the autism spectrum to help them build social skills. So check that out. We also just announced a bunch of stretch goals, including a adventure module co-designed by Jerry Holkins. So please check that out. This is going to keep happening. So I'm dealing with my own needs around this. But anyway, that's Game to Grow. Let's introduce our panelists. Let's start on that side and then come this way.
That would be you.
Hello. Here we go. Hi, I'm not up there because I'm the last minute addition to this panel, but my name is Poisal. I am a trans non-binary person. I use they, them pronouns. I have experience working with Trans Can Work, an LA organization based in trans employment, former national student organizer for GLSEN. I am a freelance game designer and writer, and I do a lot of like actual play stuff on various channels all over the internet.
Hi, my name is Jess Dempsey. I run Everything RPG project. We focus on bringing RPGs to the disabled community.
Hi, my name's Tanya DePass. I started in Direct I Need Diverse Games, which is a nonprofit aimed at getting people in the industry, getting them access. I'm also on Rivals of Waterdeep, which, you know, no shame to plug this, but we are playing our season finale tonight here at PAX. So, yes, so 9:30, come to Albatross. Let's fill the room, because it's a giant room and we will all be intimidated. And our GM is down the line. And we also are in the Diversity Lounge, so like Adam, we exist on patrons and donations, and we're doing a raffle tomorrow. So I have no shame in plugging it. Please come give us money, because we're a very small foundation that runs out of my living room.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. B. I am the clinical director of a mental health nonprofit called Take This. We most notably are known for running the AFK room at major gaming events. Go check it out, room 251. We also want money. We are in the Diversity Lounge. My pronouns are he, him, and I am here primarily to talk about neurodiversity and advocacy, because I am very public about the fact that I have autism, even though I hide it generally pretty well most of the time. So yeah.
Hi, my name is Shareef Jackson. I'm the founder of Math Looks Good LLC Tutoring, and I'm the current Dungeon Master of Rivals of Waterdeep with Tanya. And I mentioned the tutoring because I often like to incorporate elements of RPGs and video games in my sessions. So that's what, hi.
I'm Ruty Rutenberg. I am the Dungeon Master for Inkwell Society. I am co-author of The Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron. I am a combat veteran, and my advocacy lies in that, hidden disabilities, and communicating those kind of needs back and forth.
Awesome. So I already mentioned my name. We are missing one of our panelists right here who is on his way. That is Cicero. He is in traffic, so he'll be here as soon as he can. We'll make sure we welcome him when he gets here. I mentioned earlier my work with Game to Grow. I also will speak to my own experience with invisible disability and the advocacy work that I do involving youth in the gaming world, as well as neurodiversity. So my request that I made to the panelists, and what I will make for you when it's time to ask questions, that we speak to our own experience and the own advocacy work that we do asking questions, because questions is an important thing that we do, but I want to remind you that we can only speak to our own experience. So I've talked a lot about why I think the world would be a better place if everyone plays games. But for me to talk about that, we sort of have to break down what it means when I say everyone. So my background was in, I went to grad school to learn counseling and education. And I remember when I was in grad school, we learned that in order to be a good counselor, you have to be what is called culturally competent. And what that means is that not every person who walks into the clinic or walks into my classroom as a teacher lives the same life that I do. I have a very particular bodysuit that I wear and a way that I walk through the world. And most of my students don't do that. They don't look like me, they don't sound like me, they don't talk like me, they don't have the same set of experiences that I do. And the more that I can understand where I fit, and then understand where they fit, we can actually work together to get everybody's needs met. That is called cultural competence in the context of being a counselor or a teacher, but I think we can do the same thing as gamers. I think we can totally make the world a more inclusive, beautiful place, celebrating the richness of the human experience, if we can understand who we are and who other people are. So when I was in grad school, I came across this article written by Pamela Hayes about the addressing model, and it really helped me understand just the complete landscape, the palette of human cultural experience. So we're going to go through that really quickly before we get started with the panels. So the addressing model. Pamela Hayes broke down the addressing model into an acronym. And these are all of the different ways that she outlines, and there are more, but that she outlined that we can fit culturally. So there's age, there's disability, but there's also disability, developmental disability, and also acquired disability. And I don't like the term disability. I'm just representing Pamela Hayes' model here. There's also religion, ethnicity and race, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, indigenous heritage, national origin, and gender. And you don't represent just one of those things. On each one of those letters, you fall somewhere on a spectrum. So if I was really going to have a panel of people up here to talk about the entire palette of intersectionality, I would have hundreds of people. So just know, if I talk about disability, I'm talking about disability from a person with white skin who was raised Christian, and that is my experience, and not necessarily anybody else's experience who has similar issues around disability. So with that said, my first question to the panelists, why is this important? Why should we continue advocating for inclusivity in games?
Because more people at the game table is fun?
Yeah.
Well, and also we actually, like, brown people exist. We're not like figments of anyone's imagination in the outside world. So why shouldn't I get to exist in a fantasy setting? And when games and settings and game makers have to come up with convoluted dissertation-length reasons why there could be a brown elf when you have Scottish orcs and dragons and everything else, that makes no sense. If you can have a world with magic, you can have somebody who's brown, because if you have an old system with people outside all day farming and walking 20 miles in the desert and the heat and the sand and what have you, they're gonna be brown. So there's not really a reason. There's no better reason than people go outside to have brown folks in your settings. So why do we have to have the verbal and mental gymnastics of, but brown elves and these people probably, like, they're uneducated and poor. It's like, you know that there are actual kingdoms with brown people that you could put in your settings. You don't have to stay in medieval England because it's boring.
My answer on that is because the world outside of gaming space, the environment that we live in, is increasingly becoming more hostile to us. The defunding a lot of education for students with disabilities. They are attacking queer rights in multiple state levels. Texas just passed new bills for religious protections for people to discriminate against queer folk. The world is becoming increasingly more hostile, it feels like, to a lot of our groups and a lot of the identities that people at this table hold. And we need to be able to create that safe space and that bastion for it within the community and advocate for those people, because creating these sort of communities is how we create change in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, all kinds of media are best when the most amount of stories from the most diverse amount of people are being told. It's books, movies, TV, all kinds of media. Gaming is no different. But the uniqueness of gaming is obviously that we can, make our own choices and put ourselves in the stories and really drive them. And I think that, diversity is more than just like a catchphrase or like a checkbox. It literally means that we're getting the best out of the medium when there's more, diverse stories and creators out there.
That was pretty much what I was gonna go with there, because you.
I'm sorry.
You just hit it right on the head.
melded it.
Yeah, and that's what we should be doing, right? Like we should be trying to make the greatest stretches to understand story and people, and we all kind of like have our own rose-colored glasses, the experiences that we've had to come in, and it's impossible for us to be able to think outside of our box until we invite everyone else into it to play. And then we can open the borders of our box and be more inclusive to everyone. And that's including like, there's situations that happen post-combat that we never talk about in D&D really, right? But those can be very impactful story-wise and can be helpful to go through the mindset of like not only what's happening within the particular parameters of that group, but even within the nation or the city-states or wherever else we're going from there. And everybody's perspective lends to building a game world that is actually alive to you, which helps us to translate that into the real world.
Yeah, and building on what everybody has said, if you include different type of people in your games, whether it be gender, race, disability, anything like that, you have the ability to explore what that means and learn what that means in a safe setting. Like, it may be bad to go up to somebody in the public eye and ask about their life experiences, but if you try to explore it with like-minded individuals in your game, you can educate yourself and learn how to accept the rest of society that you may not interact with on a day-to-day basis.
Right. It definitely allows us to walk into things and be considerate of be open-minded to everybody else's position at the table before just jumping in with our own specific identity or context.
So one thing we will be definitely talking about later on in this panel is what feels like sometimes a requirement for self-disclosure around your needs. So I will do this right now. I'm deaf in this ear, so I have no idea what any of them just said. I'm sure you all said amazing things. Normally as a moderator, I would wrap up what they said and summarize it and present it in a nice way before moving on. But it sounded like you guys all knew what you were talking about. And that's fantastic. If my podium was on the other side, I would have done much better. I should have advocated for that. Lesson learned. So raise your hand if you are someone in the audience who is a game master. Awesome. So the next question that I pose to you guys, and I hope you answer as beautifully as I'm sure you just did, is to speak to how do you as a game master, so not just the content of the game, but in the way that you orchestrate and facilitate a game, how do you make sure the space is inclusive? And I'm going to also lob it right now to Jess to speak about DOTS in particular, but I want everybody to think about not just the storyline, but the actual table space.
Yeah. DOTS's primary focus to start with was opening up the access to RPGs to blind and visually impaired. And the first step there was Braille rulebooks. Those kind of things don't exist. Up until recently, if we're talking 5th edition, D&D Beyond has been around a year and a half about now. Before that, the visually impaired really had no way to access the books. So here's an entire population of people that can't enjoy this game unless somebody else reads a book to them. And somebody that was actually the inspiration for DOTS, this individual named D, he memorized, I think, 15, 20 games, and he was a game master. He had somebody sit there and read the books to him just so that he can play a game. And like, that's something that the average individual doesn't think about is what other people will go through just to be able to sit down at a table and have fun. You know, the important thing is if you have somebody new that's coming into your game, maybe take them aside and say, what can I do to make this situation easier for you? Or is there anything you need? Or is there any way that I can help you? You need to have communication with the individuals in this community and just ask what people need. You know, you don't know until you ask.
One thing I do is invite different people to the table. Because for me, a lot of times when I go to conventions, when I go to things like Gen Con, I don't play games at those conventions because I don't know who I'm going to sit down with. And that's not me being a snob, that's me keeping myself safe. Because I've had bad experiences with people I know. Because not everything can come up in session zero being when you sit down, make your characters, talk about what's okay, what's not okay, talk about your boundaries if people don't know what a session 0 is. And it's not just keeping it to people that are friends in real life, etc., because there's so many tools that will let us play with people we like. Even this guy, who managed to walk in right when I'm trying to make a very serious point. Good job, Cicero.
Good timing.
But to be inclusive, Rivals of Waterdeep, Greg Tito, if you ever see this, good job, you're a good guy, and addressed me and said, hey, I want to put together a show, who do you know in Chicago? And I asked Shareef and Cicero, and neither of them had a lot of experience with D&D, and I wanted to bring them in, one, because I know them and trust them, but also to show that everyone can learn to play, because there's a lot of assuming that tabletop is not for me as a person of color. There's a lot of not seeing people like me until like D&D 5th edition had a black woman as the iconic human. So it's thinking about not just who's at the table, who am I bringing in that may not be familiar, who am I bringing in that may be intimidated and feel like, oh, I need a math degree to roll a character in D&D. And Raphael's laughing if you can't hear him. But a lot of my friends, especially other black women I know, were like, this is too much, it's a lot. And it's like, here's a nice pre-generated character. We're just gonna get you comfortable with rules, because the rules, learning how to do things, because who here has had a rules lawyer at the table? Raise your hand. Who has been a rules lawyer? Tell on yourself. All of you are gamer crimes. But doing those things where you are doing everything in your power as a GM to make people comfortable and safe. Having safety tools like the X card. Quickly, for those that don't know, the X card is a physical or digital card with an X. So let's say something comes up during the campaign, because you never know what could trigger you, and I mean trigger in the actual sense, not the attempt at making a joke out of it that some people do. So, like there could be something in your past, something like a word, a scent, a description that will trigger a memory or a reaction, and you can put that card down and go, not okay. And then your GM can roll that back. So keeping the people in mind, because we don't know everyone's experience, no matter how well we know each other, and making sure everyone's safe and comfortable and communicating. That is the biggest thing at a table. As a GM with other players, if we were all in a campaign together, going, hey, that storyline you want to do, I'm not cool with that. And either at the table, not at the table, being okay with, that's not all right with me. I may have made a brown character, but I don't want to always be the poor cousin, or I don't want, if I'm a female player, I don't want to be the healer or the cleric. Letting people explore safely, but doing it in a welcoming and calm environment.
So I have two biases when it comes to being a DM, and they both come from my both professional and personal experience. One, as a mental health professional, let the client lead. Listen to them. But two, being on the autism spectrum, I like parameters. I don't do well with ambiguity. So I'm a big believer setting up framework using session 0. But, and so as a DM, listen to your players. The first academic research that was done on Dungeons & Dragons or fantasy role-playing games at large was in 1983 by a guy named Gary Allen Fine in a book called Shared Fantasy, which is a great read, by the way. Like, seriously, no sarcasm. It's wonderful. And at the time, there was a lot of criticism about the DM being the god of the world, and you are initiating your players into this cult-like atmosphere that you will control their minds in a hypnotic fashion. And any DM who's ever really played knows that's crap.
Yeah, no.
Just go through the door, please, sweet Jesus, go through the door.
It's right there.
But the
Just
point,
that's
one of the
beautiful.
points that Gary Allen Fine makes is that the DM, or he called it the referee, is in fact a god, but a god without believers has no power. So there is a symbiotic relationship that exists between you and your players, and the DM, while they may be an omnipotent god of this world, has to listen to their believers. You have to respond to your players. And subsequently, I like to let them lead. I like to make sure, and this is my therapy background coming in, I check in with players constantly. Do you have any feedback? What are we doing well? What can we do better? Is there anything that makes you uncomfortable? And I've had several of the teenagers I've worked with over the years very specifically and explicitly say, I want my character to perhaps be non-binary. Okay, cool. What makes that important to you? If you're comfortable telling me. Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay, let's do that. And basically just letting my players have the stories that they want to explore and having open communication with them, especially if it's not my experience, to let them lead the way. That's kind of my whole philosophy on that.
I'd like to segue on that because one of the things that I think is really important within a space to increase inclusivity for queer and trans identities is normalizing play outside of one's own assigned gender identity, where players, regardless of how they view themselves, normalize having male people play female characters, or female players play male characters, even if that's not how they identify, just having that as an experience there, because that creates a space where people that are questioning and aren't comfortable speaking about that, people who are not out of the closet, can do so, can kind of explore their own identities, express themselves as they wish without ostracizing themselves. If you have a table, if you have a space in your game where everyone is playing their own perceived gender, then the one person playing opposite that stands out and might be ostracized depending on your group, depending on the culture around you. But if it is normalized at the table, then it gives people more chance to explore, more chance to work with their own identities. And like me as a non-binary person, when I didn't really understand my own identity, the space at the table was a safe space to do that. And I'll just add some numbers to this, and why it is even more important is there's a study 2017 out of the Williams Institute at UCLA about gender and identity that showed that this was in youths aged 12 to 24, that in that age group, the people coming into this hobby now, up to 27% of these youths are either gender nonconforming in some way or viewed by their peers as gender nonconforming. And so this is over a quarter of the youths coming up are viewed as stepping outside of gender roles in some way, either by other people or through their own actions and their own identities. And so creating this sort of space that is safe for people to explore that identity, to play around with gender is really important.
That was the Williams group, you say?
The Williams Institute
Williams Institute.
at UCLA.
Not taking notes at all.
I highly recommend the study. There's a lot of information in there. It's one of the really great youth queer studies that's come out recently.
Yeah, one thing I've done as like a relatively new DM is, I think when I first started, my idea was to try to write everything that will happen. Like I had my tome of stuff, and I was like, okay, this is gonna happen first 5 minutes, and we're gonna go here and go here, and you know, and I was pretty proud of myself. I was like, yeah, I got this cool like Bible that we're gonna go by. And, you know, I didn't have to toss the whole thing out the window, but, you know, a lot of DMing, yeah, you just can't even take it, is really improvising, you know, and like making your tent poles, you know, like you're guiding things of where you kind of want people to go. But as like everybody said, like listening to the players and like giving them space to be themselves. And being able to encourage them when you notice that they might find something that you didn't even consider, but that they seem to really fall in love with. And that could be making an NPC that you meant to just be some one-off person into somebody that recurs, you know? And like I find that to like apply to like everything, including exploring like a race, gender, and like a sexuality. You know, just giving all the players a space to like be themselves and to be awesome and have a good time, and not trying to like a push like, well, but I wrote this, so we're gonna do this, like regardless of like where you might take it. You know, I've just learned to be much more like flexible, and you know, it just makes the game better.
Yeah, definitely. So I got to admit that when Satine and I created Maze Arcana in the beginning, we didn't necessarily, like, it was right at the very beginning of the boom for everything, especially streaming, and we just thought, we were like, ooh, this looks fun. And Wizard was like, do you guys want to do it? And we were like, yeah. And it was so fast that we didn't even really consider what we were, like, necessarily, like, trying to be inclusive, but at the same time, like, we're in LA, all of our friends, like, it just was what it was immediately out of the gate. And we didn't realize how impactful that was for people until maybe like 3 or 4 months in, and we were getting a lot of return stuff, a lot of communication back and forth about like, thank you guys for being an open and inclusive space. Right. And we were like, oh my God, we have been. Oh, that's, thank you God, that's just our friend circle. And that led us to start pushing for inclusivity panels at like Gen Con and other places. And that all, like, we've learned so much through the process of building Maze Arcana and the different shows and working with D&D, to where, like, I do session zeros, which you've heard multiple people talk about now. I've learned how to compact one into about 5 to 10 minutes, and I do them before AL games if I'm going to. And I always do them afterwards as well. And you don't see it if you're watching a live stream, but we do them before and after every game, because it's important for everyone to be able to decompress, to talk about the things at the table during the session that might have bumped them, that might have been close to like a yellow line for them. Or if we went over, like, I'm hoping I'm getting a note in the middle of the game if I'm DMing, because that's vitally important. The last thing that I want is somebody to be uncomfortable at the table, because everybody feels it. And it really stymies the creativity at the table and the ability to role play when people don't feel safe enough to be vulnerable. So for me, it's making sure that everybody gets the opportunity before we even sit down to play. Like, so as a dungeon master, making sure that we're encouraging and promoting a safe atmosphere for people to feel that they have the ability to communicate their needs. And then I'm also watching the whole time to see what they're not saying. Like, what is their body language telling me that they are uncomfortable with, or that there is a situation that might be developing, especially if it's between 2 other players. And I'm trying to figure out and referee what's going to go on, and then making sure that they know afterwards that they can have that conversation again, because our jobs are literally to keep the peace of the table, but of the world and everything like that, and to just improv through. We're setting up prompts for them to feel the drama, which also means that we have to be very thoughtful about how far that bleeds into everything else that they do. And introducing.
Oh yeah, hey guys, I'm Cicero Holmes. Besides being late and at the edge of the podium, so you know, you guys on the right hand can't see me, I'll just make a wild hand gesticulation so that way you know that I'm here. So besides being late, what I did hear was that the most important thing, and this is something I've got very, very little DMing experience, but I have a lot of imagination experience and a lot of experience with children. So therefore, it's like being a DM, right? The thing that's most important is active listening, and essentially, what the DM is Bob Ross at a canvas, right? But your players are your arms. And you still have to be Bob Ross to talk about how beautiful those clouds really are. Or if you thought you were getting ready to paint some clouds, but it turns out to be a mountain, you still have to spin that it's the most wonderful mountain that was ever created. And so like, it is so important to listen to your players, to not be married to the ideas that you had in your head, what you thought the picture was going to be. Your players will make the painting for you, and they are the most important part, and you don't stop them from making the painting. And they're gonna determine what it is.
I hope that somebody takes a picture of this panel and puts the Bob Ross do on all of them.
Yeah, please.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm going to quote you on that. I mentioned earlier that I'm deaf in my left ear. I can hear these two. This is great.
Yeah.
I got you guys. Thank you so much.
And we project.
Yes,
Yeah, no, that
exactly.
would be great. I can
Yeah,
totally
from
hear
the
Rudy.
theater, sorry.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Well,
I heard some discussion of session 0, and I'm curious how you navigate the space of story design and the in-game stuff that happens. So we definitely advocate Game to Grow. We advocate in our session 0s to have a black list and a white list, or a no list and a please list. So we make sure we advocate for the things that we want in our game. But I'm curious, as game masters and story creators and writers, how we make sure that our games are representative and inclusive, and what advice you could give to game masters as far as maybe what not to do in a game, maybe common pitfalls that game masters do that they should avoid to make sure their games are more inclusive.
I actually you don't have to say yes to everything. And here's why. I know there's a lot of belief in the yes and, but I'm also approaching this from a psychological therapeutic perspective, and I've worked with a lot of teens who are, by definition, teens are exploring their own identities. But I have to think about every single person at that table. And I know it was brought up that let people explore their gender identity. I will say I have said no to that on a couple of occasions after a thorough talk with some of the people who wanted to do it, because I got the sense not that they were doing it to explore their own identity, but they were doing it to be funny.
Oh yeah.
And I had 5 other people at the table to think about. And here is usually a teenage boy who wanted to go down very misogynistic stereotypes, not to explore their identity, but to basically be an edgelord.
Right.
And that ain't flying at my table. And so what I would say is thinking about the safety of your players, especially if you have a good communication with them, and some of them have disclosed vulnerable aspects of their self, you can say no for the safety of your players.
Should.
Yeah, you should.
For me, when I would GM, because I've actually GM'd both Shareef and Cicero in Star Trek Adventures, is thinking about not what's just fun for me as the GM. So a lot of people go, well, I'm the GM, and this should be fun for everyone, including me. You are telling a collaborative story. People are putting their trust in you at this table. They're being vulnerable, as Raffael said. And I might think something is totally hilarious. And if I do something and I get that stone-faced look that that kind of, you make a joke and no one else gets it, and you think you are the funniest person that has ever walked the earth. And especially in the case of Star Trek, because we were streaming it, there was the added part of, there are people watching us play, and anyone who's ever seen me knows I cannot pull a poker face, save my life. You're going to know exactly what I think of you in about 10 seconds if you see me. But as the GM, one, you have to keep the story flowing. Two, you have to make sure everyone is, maybe you don't always have a good time depending on dice rolls. Maybe your character might die. In the case of Star Trek, you may almost get eaten by a giant tentacle plant. You decided to commune with it because why not? You wanted to check on its feelings. Christina, please don't yell at me if you see this. But things like that where it's like, your players are going to kind of go and do what they want to do within the bounds of what you will allow as a GM, but also it's a story. Every game doesn't have to be combat focused. Every game doesn't have to be nothing but story. But at the end of the day, you have to remember, what is it the players want? What story are you trying to tell, and how are you going to get there? And that's why I started laughing when Shareef was talking about being a GM, because he's our GM this season. And I too have had here's where I think you're going to go. And within about 10 minutes, I'm like, for the love of God, please stop talking to this NPC. Please leave the tavern. So I think what not to do is focus on what you as the GM thinks would make a good story and talk to your players. Ask what they want. Make sure everyone kind of has that moment to shine, because the point of playing an RPG for a lot of us is I want to be the hero at some point. I want to have that great adventure. I want to have that amazing kill or that amazing triumph or smooth talk with the NPC and sleight of hand something that no one should have been able to steal. What is it that they want to get out of it? And at the end of the adventure, depending on how long you play, did everyone enjoy themselves? Were they safe? Were they comfortable? And for me, do they want to play with you again? Because there's so many people where it's like, I played with them, I will never, ever in my life sit at a table with them again. Because they're rules lawyer, they're bad GMs, they don't talk. After every episode of Rivals, pending what people got to do, we go out and talk after every show. We hang out, we get food, we kind of break down things, but we also have a Slack where we talk. So, things not to do is not to communicate in between episodes. Don't do things that you think are funny and don't run by your players, because again, you could inadvertently trigger someone. You could hurt someone very badly, and that's going to break trust in you, because your players are trusting you implicitly as a GM to bring them a good experience, to bring fun to the table. And if you are streaming, if you are on a show, whether it's an official Wizards of the Coast, whatever you're doing, or if you're just on your own Twitch channel, Mixer, what have you, you are putting yourself in the hands of the viewers, and they're trusting you to give you an experience, a show, a narrative experience where they can watch you and not be harmed. And granted, they can come and go, they can leave, but that is an added layer to you need to be safe, you need to be someone who is trustworthy at the GM seat. And you also need to know when to take a back seat and let your players kind of run with it.
Yep.
Building on what Tanya said, there's there's a lot of things that you may want to do as a GM, but talking to your players is the most important thing. Just like we've all been saying, different options for gender identity, different expressions will allow your players to explore themselves and their identity. You can do the same thing as a GM, but run it by your players. Like if there's something that you think you want to do and it's maybe a little weird, just ask. Like these people at your table, whether they're new, whether they're old, they're your friends. Even if it's just for a few hours, even if it's just for, a one shot, these people are your collaborative storytellers. You're doing everything together. And there's no harm in taking another few minutes to say, what do you guys think about this? Or even mid-session. I mean, I've done it with some of my players. I've stopped mid-session and say, this feels a little weird. What do we all think? And just go with it. Like, there's no harm in having more communication. Like, there's never anything that will come negatively of saying, what do you think? Or how does this make you feel? And doing that and building that community just with your few people at the table, that'll translate to other games. When your players go to other games, then they'll bring that same expectation of, I want to communicate my feelings, or I want to talk about things before they happen. And overall, if we all just keep doing that, it'll just keep spreading, and that'll become the new norm, is everybody always talks. Everybody has like a session zero, everybody communicates with each other. And it'll just make for better sessions, whether they be home private games, whether they be streaming games. It's really just going to benefit everybody if you just have a few minutes conversation and get everyone on the same page, see where they all are.
Yeah. Be the best practices you want to see in the world.
Yes.
Like, be that example. I think the original question was about things we as GMs could do to create space and some GM pitfalls.
Yeah.
There's one that talked about before, but I really like for talking about if you want to include more queer identities and queer folk in your, like in not even at your table, but like within your story, within the world that you're creating as a DM. Don't drop like individual queer folk out in the world as like the little lone like representation things. Like we're all over the place, but what's even more important is like we tend to create communities for ourselves, and we tend to create organizations for ourselves and social structures. And so there's all these other social structures and groups within worlds, within games, and then individual specks of queer folk. And so think about ways in which these identities can be intersected with each other and have structures. They don't just stand on their own. They're part of a greater social setting.
Realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one big thing as well as a DM, especially in the session 0, is to remember that if you're specifically doing D&D, that the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master's guides are guides. And especially when it comes to races and what they're supposed to do, like a lot of that stuff, is based on a certain archetype that you don't necessarily have to follow. Like dwarves don't always have to do a certain thing, elves don't always have to do a certain thing. Like be a little more experimental. And this is what's good about knowing who your players are, is make sure that you're creating NPCs that, help to show both the strengths and the weaknesses of your players. And everything doesn't have to be this European Tolkien kind of idea of what these people are. Because to be honest, a lot of people like me were not, included in that kind of stuff, unless they were dark elves or orcs or that kind of stuff. So just don't feel too chained by what the historical, I don't like him.
Don't say it. Don't say it.
I'm in the middle of this.
Just feel free to you can define characters however you want, and just use these books as a guide, not well, on page 83 it says that this person always responds this way to this or they favor this. It's no, be experimental.
I think that's why we get a lot of prompts in at least the 5th edition stuff where it says that they have certain feelings in a direction of this as opposed to this is their answer for this. I know that there's been a conscious effort for us to move away from using box text entirely and to come into these are the important points for the system or for this session, and for this NPC and stuff like that, and allows the DM to have a lot more flexibility in what they're doing. And it really is we as both players, dungeon masters, just in this community in general, we should be aware of the context that we're playing and the people that we're playing with in order to be able to at least approach whatever those norms are in a different light. As a veteran, I would say that the second most common thing that people would say to me when they find out I'm a veteran is they ask me if I've killed anybody. And that's freaking ridiculous in the sense of how many people have been in a car accident?
Right.
And how many people, the first thing you do is you relive that. Do you really want me to relive that so constantly?
Right.
Sorry. Why don't you go first? And I'll come back.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's a road trip, you're on a road trip with some people and you're the driver as a DM. And you guys ultimately know what the destination should be, but you don't have to take the highway. You know, maybe you want to stop off on this place. You know, and it really does depend. Again, it depends on the people you're with. And as the DM, as the driver, you have to try and make everyone comfortable. Guys, I'm really bad at analogies.
Thank you.
So, like, I just kind of talk in analogies and metaphors. It's like black fat Yoda. It's
Well, you crushed the first one.
oh, all right, right on. Yeah, well, you know, it's all downhill from here. But yeah, so I mean, it's a road trip. You guys are on the road. You guys are together, for better or for worse. There are going to be times where it's fantastic. There are going to be times where it's a little bit anxious. It's a little bit, much. But at the end, when that road trip is over, you hope that people sit back and say, "Oh man, that was a good time. That was a really, really good time." And I mean, in fact, I was just yesterday, a friend of ours was talking about a spur-of-the-moment road trip from Chicago to New Orleans that was packed full of like 30 cartons of cigarettes and weird stops at Graceland, which is right across the street from a Texaco. Like it's just bizarre. But that's what D&D is. And as a newbie, as a neophyte into it, it's the thing that I've truly fallen in love with is the fact that I can collaborate with people that I knew well, but didn't know as well as I do now because of the insights that I've gleaned as a result of playing D&D, and people that I didn't know at all before playing D&D and now know incredibly well and consider these people friends. It is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Cicero, quick question.
Yes.
Was your friend doing an unplanned sequel to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
I cannot neither confirm nor deny that.
Because I got to tell you, when you get down to New Orleans, it's blues country.
Right.
Fear and Loathing in Graceland.
Right.
But I think so thank you guys all for having patience with me with that. But also it's a lot about being patient and being thoughtful about the additional considerations that we should be making as people in general. Being thoughtful of that little extra that gives you the detours, that notes out to making something special in your mind. Like when we make a story as a dungeon master or as I did screenwriting, I still do it, but that was like my segue into starting to do the live streaming for D&D was screenwriting. And you have a very set story plan, right? But it's always those things that surprise you when you're writing that make that such an impactful and different thing, which your players do for you constantly. And so sometimes that can be as simple as just changing up the slightest details. The very first most thing that I get the most as a veteran is thank you for your service, right? And after a while, it starts to sound like a throwaway, which we learn a lot about in improv, right? Like throwaway lines, stuff like that is supposed to derail a situation in certain areas. But when we want that, sometimes that can take the sincerity out of it, because I believe that ultimately everyone is sincere when they say that, but I hear it so frequently it becomes desensitive. So even changing it to like, I appreciate, or the service you did for this country. Little things like that set off little trip mines in my head where I go, oh, that is actually, somebody put consideration and thought into the way that they're approaching the situation. And as a DM or when I'm a player or anything like that, I want to approach the situation from a way that makes everybody else, or that gives everybody else the opportunity and promotes and encourages them to have a unique experience and to feel vulnerable enough to do it.
That just reminded me of a piece of advice I gave the other night that I think is very apropos to this discussion we're having here at the table, is dealing with any sort of inclusivity at your table. If you want to be better at it, and you often find yourself making small mistakes in the moment, is to slow down, is to take small moments, allow yourself to take small moments before you immediately respond at the table, before you immediately go right into what you were thinking about, to let yourself breathe, to examine whether you are about to go over an unconscious bias or a phrase that you normally use, or you're going to use pronouns that come naturally but are going to be incorrect in the moment. Take that moment, think about it, and then speak. And if you I think giving yourself small little moments to think, to process before you jump right in, allows a lot better communication at the table and allows us to communicate more effectively, and helps us navigate tripping over unconscious biases or prejudices or just poor turns of phrase that might come as a result.
Right, or assuming somebody means something when they haven't had the opportunity, like you didn't give them an opportunity to clarify, because like we kind of all need to be able to frame the context. So sometimes us asking questions about like, oh, this is what you said, is this what you meant, or can you, would you walk me through that again? Because sometimes we can jump to a conclusion based on somebody's words and they may not have thought through it. And that's why we have to be thoughtful about it as well. And if we're all practicing that, then it keeps us from...
Yeah.
The next question I was going to ask was, stuff comes up. Game masters mess up. Players mess up. I had a player in my groups the other day who's a teenager, and I mentioned that I wish that I had a dishwasher. And he said, Adam, you don't have a dishwasher? Don't you have a wife? And I was like...
You won't.
And we had a conversation about it. And I had to let him know that was, if that was a joke, I didn't appreciate it. That I don't find that stuff funny. I love my wife very much. And then I realized over the course of conversation that what he meant was, aren't you an adult? You have a wife, you're an adult. Don't adults have dishwashers? And it was entirely misunderstood. He was not equating my wife with the dishwasher. But that was my impulse, was to be like, don't you talk about my wife like that. And I work with a lot of kids, and that still touched a nerve with me. And I've been doing this for 8 years, and I still occasionally get a nerve. And it was my responsibility to like pause, to think about it, and to have a conversation. And I'm curious if there's any tools you guys use to have conversations. Dr. B, you were talking the other day about how was it yesterday, last night, you were talking about a specific sentence frame you use sometimes when you talk about how, with care and concern.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was like, you had to specify. It's been a blur last couple of days. So before I started working with teenagers and now working in the video game community, I actually trained as a prison shrink. I loved it. I kind of miss it because as a caregiver, you go where care is needed. And the final unit I worked on at that prison was what's called a modified therapeutic community, where we're teaching transitional living skills to guys who are about to release. Because a lot of them had been incarcerated for 20 years, and there is a truth to the idea of getting institutionalized.
Right.
And so with this peer model, we were teaching about addressing behavioral concerns, pure behavior. And behavior is only what you see and hear, okay? There's no opinion with behavior. It's just what a person says or does. And it's so deceptively simple, it's hard. Like the behavior that we're expressing up here, we're sitting, we're talking. Simple as that. So if there was a behavior that was problematic on the unit, the guys were supposed to go to each other and begin with a phrase. Out of care and concern, I would like to bring something to your attention. And this is a behavior that I think will impact yours and our growth. And they would address specifically the behavior, whether it was being late to meetings consistently, whether it was owing coffee to somebody, whether it was, crunching raw ramen in your cell at 3 a.m. Anything like that, but it's just talking about behaviors. So, at a table, I might bring up, hey, out of care and concern, I want to bring up the fact that it seems like you're interrupting people a lot. And I think that may impact yours and everybody else's experience at the table. Let's talk about that. And then start to understand their motivations behind it. Kind of what Adam said about the kid didn't mean to equate his wife to a dishwasher. Right. But that stuff's going to come up, and openly addressing it without opinion, without editorial, has been a tool that I have used. It's not the only tool, but it's the one I have used. And so hopefully that can be useful to you as well.
Well, another tool, and make sure that I'm staying on track, is that, if behaviors come up at your table or even in interacting with people outside the table, just be blunt. Ask, what did you mean by that? And tone is important here, because I know that I can have that, and Raphael's going to start laughing. You see, anyone on this panel who has known me for more than 5 minutes is going to start laughing, because I am not a mother, but my grandmother will leap out of my mouth at any given moment. And, it's like, well, what did you mean by that versus what did you mean? Tone is very important when you have these conversations, because sometimes, no matter how well you know people, you can cross wires really badly. And some days maybe you're just not having the best day, and even though the intent may be clear as day any other day, but on a day like today where I've had a cup of coffee, didn't get a lot of sleep or good sleep, and I've got to be here for about 12 hours, I may not take intent the best way. But just think about that, because I know we keep saying it, communication is key in all of this. In being a good GM, being a good player, being a good viewer. If you're watching a Twitch stream, and I harp on that because most of the D&D that I play, most of the tabletop I play is in front of a live audience. So that is another factor for anyone in the room who either is on a show, thinking about starting a show, or a podcast. And podcast has that other layer of people can't see you. They can only go by their auditory cues. And so if you're not descriptive enough, if you have a tone, because Cicero and I, our characters often butt heads, but we love each other dearly. Right. 9 times out of 10. There's some days where I'm
10
like,
out of 10 for me, Tanya.
What?
It's 10 out of 10 for me.
Okay, 9.5 out of 10. Some days. But that closeness came from being on the show, hanging out every week. Right. But again, I'm going to harp on communication till they tell us that we have no time left, which we almost don't. So whatever you're doing in tabletop to be inclusive, communicate. The question that you'll never get an answer to is the one that you do not ask because you might be afraid. Mm-hmm. And yes, I've bitten people's head off on Twitter, but they're the 20th person to ask me a stupid question before 10 a.m. into my second cup of coffee.
You did mention the sentence framing thing very specifically, and I think that the book that you shared with me, well, not even a year ago, Nonviolent Communication, there's the phrase in there, would you be willing to? And then you kind of go into that opportunity there. And it gives you an opportunity to both share your needs in there, but also to find out what the needs are of the other person that aren't being met, and how those are different from your wants specifically and what you hope to accomplish in a situation. And going back to the idea of changing the little things here and there, obviously any phrase that we use can be turned and manipulated into something else. Absolutely. Even something is like, with the out of care and consideration or compassion or anything like that, if you say it too much and it becomes stale, people will feel that. So being attentive to how you're coming across in those scenarios is super important, and not jumping to the knee-jerk reactions like Tanya was saying. Like the difference between being brave and bold, right? Being brave is walking into a situation knowing what the dangers are, knowing how much you stand to lose, and deciding that it is the right thing to do. Versus bold, which is rushing blindly into a room, kicking the door down and screaming and yelling because you heard something from the other side of the wall that you didn't like too much. And that's what keeps us, that's what elevates us above, beast, I suppose, is that we're thoughtful, we can be thoughtful about those things. And so making sure that we're taking every effort to consider the ramifications of the situation before we go rushing in, and considering the feelings of everybody else and what their needs are and how we can attempt to meet those needs at the same time.
So being brave is Cicero Holmes knowing full well that he's going to Boston and wearing all sorts of New York sports but also giving people the benefit of the doubt. If you're not in a hostile situation, don't assume that someone's phrasing or question or comment to you is hostile, even if it sounds like it could be interpreted that way. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Ask them genuinely what they meant by that. I've used that in my life constantly and I think it's worked well.
So
At least he gives him the opportunity to go, oh.
I just got the time signal. So really quickly, I just want to go down the line and tell people how they can get in contact with you or watch you on stream or whatever it is real quickly, just down the line so people can get in contact with you later.
Which way?
Whichever way wants to start.
All right, well, hey, I am Cicero Holmes. You can find me on Stubby Stan, or you can call me at 212. No.
Oh, you're done.
Yeah.
I'm Ruty Rutenberg, and you can find me at Ruty Woot on all the social media things. I'm also the Dungeon Master for Inkwell Society on twitch.tv/D&D, and co-founder of Maze Arcana with Satine Phoenix. You can find a decent amount of stuff there on that Twitch, too.
Hi, I'm Shareef Jackson. You can find me at shareefjackson.com or at Shareef Jackson on all social networks. Also, 9:30 p.m. tonight, Albatross Theater, Rivals of Waterdeep Season 3 finale. Come through.
That's what I was hoping for.
I am the Dr. B on Twitter, 2 E's, but you can also contact us at takethis.org, and you can also see me streaming along with this gentleman here with a bunch of therapeutic DMs on Clinical Role.
Very smooth, very smooth. My name is Tanya. You can find me. Damn it. I'm just laughing because we talked about this earlier. So Cypher of Tyr, which is up there. I'm also on Rivals of Waterdeep. Please come to our panel. We'll be awesome. And it's our first chance to do this live at PAX. I'm super, super excited. We have brand new dice, courtesy of Level Up, that we get to show off tonight. And also, I'm the Diversity Lounge. Please come give us money because conventions are expensive. And the more of them I do, the more money we need. We have Patreon, etc. And you can also find me on Twitch. I'm a partner Twitch streamer. I do a lot of variety. And I'm also a Take This Stream ambassador, which I failed to mention earlier.
Again, my name is Jess Dempsey. I do everything Dots RPG Project. It's a developing 501c3 charity that is focused on improving accessibility in gaming. So we've got dotsrpg.com and pretty much any social media at dotsrpg.
Hi, I'm not up there, so I'm going to spell it out. I'm Poisal. You can find me on Twitter at Poisal, Poisal, Poisal. Yeah. And you can also find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Poisal, where I just kind of stream myself. And you can find me streaming with the Uncommon Trust on various channels on our regular shows Sundays on twitch.tv/QTimes. And probably some future things. So just follow me on Twitter. It's the easiest.
And really quickly, because a couple people actually tweeted and asked what I was fidgeting with. And this is Raphael's fault. This is a fidget cube from Level Up Dice. They're way in the back at the tabletop area. I did see them in the case. I don't know if they have any left, but it is, I need to fidget with things. So it's basically 8d6 hinged together. So go to Level Up Dice and tell them I sent you.
I'll be there blessing dice from 1 to 2 o'clock, in case you wanted to. And I forgot about one other thing, too, is that you can also find stuff on the DMs Guild that pertains specifically to what we're doing. And I just released with Keith Baker the follow-up to the Wayfinder's Guide called Moregrave's Miscellany. And in there is an entire section about session zeros and how to approach darker subject matter, like in a noir setting and stuff like that, which you might find helpful for how to set up your games in advance.
Awesome. You can find me at game2grow.org/support. Thank you guys so much. There's a Game to Grow table down in the expo hall. Have a great rest of your PAX.